and hello to everybody. And we stay on the topic now of education. And I'm joined by Brian Smith, who is in charge, apart from being a board member alongside myself of the American Scottish Foundation, is heads up one of the aspects of the Strathclyde alumni. You're on the board of trustees now, is that correct?
Well, I don't think we call ourselves trustees, but I'm on the board of, I'm one of the directors of the University of Strathclyde's Foundation in the US.
Great.
Which we fundamentally use to deal with contributions for research, people who are in the US and want to sponsor a university, sponsor research, sponsor students, and also deal with the relationships between the US, the university in the US, and other organizations here and organizations back in Scotland.
I really hope that on this panel with you, Rory, here, and Brian here, we can discuss how the diaspora can maximize all these wonderful ambassadors that we have of American students and Scots who have returned, are here in the States now, having experienced education in Scotland. We'd love to do more with them. And maybe, Brian, if you could start off by explaining how we could be reaching the networks, for instance, of Strathclyde. And your wife is part of the Glasgow alumni structure here. So between the two of you, you've got quite a big, big influence on that.
Yeah, most of the, and we live in New Jersey, just outside New York. So these comments are a little slanted towards the New York environment. But all of the Scottish universities do have alumni associations here in the US. Some are bigger than others, some are more widely dispersed than others. And we even talk to each other. Last year, we even had an inter-universities curling competition in New York. Only one person knew how to curl, but that was neither here nor there. But so we do talk to each other. But each of the organizations does try to connect with their alumni and does try to connect their alumni with the other Scottish organizations in the broader community. And that's something I think we can do better. Rory and I were just talking about that at dinner a couple of weeks ago, about how we can maybe do more of that.
So Rory, you of course came out of being in Ailey's position a few years ago, and so really were trying to get the ambassadors, the University Ambassador Network going. What do you think we could do? I don't know where the other ones are around the country. I know of you, Brian, and of Jackie, but how can we need a better networking?
Yeah, so it's definitely the sort of low-hanging fruit in terms of the North American diaspora. I think when you think of diaspora from a cultural sense, we've kind of got that nailed with the amount of culture groups that we've got. Tapping into the potential value of alumni isn't necessarily directly correlated with having them embed themselves within these diaspora groups. They often want something different. But if I can step back for a second, so we across Scotland just now, if you look at where we are trying to connect into people in the US, you've got the business community that operates in the trade and investment space. You've got the sort of heritage and lineage angle to it, and the sort of missing piece is the alumni. And I think that it exists in pockets, to Brian's point, but when I was in the government, it was really difficult to infiltrate that because the universities weren't allowed to share information for a lot of like very sensible reasons, but also because they obviously want to protect their own interests. What I've also seen is that some alumni groups themselves have actually sort of decided to do their own thing. And there is this sense, and certainly I've seen in the last 18 months, that they want to play ball with the other sort of alumni chapters that exist. And I think that that's something to be welcomed. There was an earlier point made around access and actually knowing what our alumni want to tap into. Sometimes they want to be with people who went to their university. Some people, they just want to stay connected to Scotland because they've enjoyed their time while they were studying there. But it's also directly correlated to those people who occupy the space. And I don't want to put an age bracket on it, but from sort of graduation through the sort of first 15, 20 years of their career, when they're having families, they're moving around, they are trying to climb the corporate ladder. They don't have the time to be connecting into everything that Scotland is doing in the US from a diaspora standpoint. So you have to be offering them something that really catches their attention, and they're going to take a decision that they want to be part of that moving forward. I'll sort of end my comments on that by coming full circle to my time in the Scottish Government. One of the things that we did in the sort of last year of my role there, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn because Ailey actually continued that model last night in DC, is that we used the alumni as the driver to create events. So we were reaching out to new people who weren't already in our existing network. That was quite resource intensive because we had to go out and map who these people were. And we were inviting them in, and we were offering them something that they've not been offered before, being able to come into a room, hear about what contemporary modern Scotland is doing, but also be amongst peers. So the only connection with them in the room from our standpoint was the fact that they were alumni of a Scottish university. And what we tended to find there is, whilst it wasn't a ticketed event, so it was free and people want to come and enjoy Scottish hospitality, we saw the sort of margin for the drop-off on those events being very, very slim. I'll give a very practical example of one we did in New York. We invited 90 and 89 turned up. So normally with those sort of events, you see attrition, and it's usually around about 30%. I'll not bore people with numbers, but we knew that we kind of had hit a mark there. Now, there are tens of thousands of alumni in the US, so you can't do that all of the time, but it's small steps to being able to sort of harness the potential of the alumni as a collective.
But as you said, the 25 to 45 age group, as they come back here and they're into the States, they have a lot of things pulling on them, family, getting themselves going. And I think we as organizations need to recognize that and offer them maybe, better priced events or opportunities to maybe have the universities lead on a panel on a subject which we can be part of, because I've found some of the political or the economic panels that have been put together by the universities to be extremely interesting. So I think that would be helpful.
There's fascinating stories to tell coming out of universities, whether it's their R&D, whether it's people that have excelled and maybe have become public figures, and they use them as a sort of hook to get people into the room. I think absolutely that's the way to do it. To a point I made on the earlier session, though, and I think to some of the stuff that was alluded to in earlier panels, there is still a stigma attached to young people engaging with some of these more traditional focused groups, even though the programming within those groups is very modern, very contemporary. I think they have this sort of connotation of they hear a St. Andrew's Society or something like that, and they deliberately default to the sort of heritage and lineage and ancestry angle. And I know that that's not the case. So maybe we need to take a step back and think about how we're communicating. I've done that in my day job recently. I think one of the things with my program is that we can do all these amazing creative and have all these amazing marketing documents, but if they just look good and they're not getting on the right eyes, then what's the point in the first place? So I'm constantly trying to challenge myself to make sure that when I'm out there talking to people who are wanting to work with our program, trying to connect back into alumni that we've had, how do I know that awareness raising piece is working and it's resonating? And the most frustrating thing is it's impossible to measure the impact of that immediately. Sometimes it's you get lightning in a bottle and it happens straight away, and sometimes it's a slow burn. It can take years before people actually start to see the value, and I think that more needs to be done to be looking at accelerating that process.
And what do you feel on that one?
I think there were two separate issues there. I think there is a bigger community than we know exists. There's people like me who went to university in Scotland and came here for business years later, and that's part of the community. But there's also a large part of the alumni community who don't always realize they are alumni of Scottish universities because they went there for a year as part of a program with a university here. And I think the universities in Scotland are beginning to do a better job of connecting with these people and in getting them to realize they too are members of that community. And every year when we have, Tartan Week and we have the parade, every year we find more. People come, so I went to that university. We said, well, come on. So we do need to do a better job, as Rory says, of finding and communicating with that growing community.
And to Brian's point there as well, just quickly, Camilla, to Brian's point there, if they've only done a year at a Scottish university and the other 3 are at a university in the US, rest assured the US university is doing a better job than us in staying connected to them. And you really have to be there from day one, reminding them that the quality of their education that they received was in part because of a Scottish university. I think we start to lose credibility if we disconnect from them at the point of graduation and only try and reconnect with them when they're in a position of influence or power, and we want to try and extract some of that, so to speak. So if you think about, just now we look at networks across the US, so I'm going to go into the business space very, very briefly. I promise I won't take up too much time. But if you look at what like Global Scot Network is, so that's the trade and investment ambassador network that exists globally. There's about 350 of them in the US. Most of the people that sit in the Global Scot Network are at the point in their career where they have influence, they have a little bit more time, maybe they've reached C-suite, but they've probably not been spoken to or courted since graduation, because we're very, very good at talking to them whilst they're still studying. So what's happening in that 15, 20 years in the middle? Now, if you're Scottish, you can probably get them back to the table because there is that direct line to Scotland and they want to be seen to be helping and giving back. But if they're an American or a Canadian student that studied in Scotland, then they're not, their first thought is to not just jump on board because you've not spoken to them for 20 years or 15 years or whatever it might be.
I have to say on another point is that you're correct that we need to explain to Scotland that there is a different language when they're speaking to Americans over here. It's not long paragraphs, it's bullet points, and it's speaking in that direct fashion. And I think that would also help in the connecting of what everybody's trying to get across, and that they ought to be listening a little bit to the ambassadors speaking to them back.
We also have several of the universities, and not all of them in Scotland, do have staff here in the US.
Right.
A couple of them in New York, whose primary role is working with the other institutions here and signing up students to go and study there. As somebody mentioned earlier, it's a big part of the economy of the Scottish universities, students from overseas. But we could do more to find and engage these people. I think we know who they are in New York. I'm not sure we know of the ones who are based elsewhere.
Well, you are one of the people, and so is Jackie, who lead these large groups. How are you finding it when you're asked, well, who are alumni in San Francisco or in Chicago?
Well, that gets challenging because we ask the university and they say GDPR, and we can't tell you, it's a secret, and we go around in circles. This is a governmental problem that we'll talk further to Ailey about in due course.
I think that's a big...
I mean, I came up against that challenge around the clock. There's also, I think, universities tend to, or at least sometimes want to hide behind GDPR around sharing the sort of distribution list that exists. We're lucky that we live in a world now, though, that you can data scrape quite quickly to see. I mean, simply typing in the university into LinkedIn will populate people who have put the fact that they've gone to that university on it, and you can geolocate that, so you can look at the lists that exist in a certain geography. So when the alumni events that I've spoken about, where we were investing resource in actually mapping who these people were, a large part of that was done through online resources and being able to identify people simply because they're volunteering that information.
That's one of the best ideas that's come out of today. How to reach our alumni ambassadors. Any questions for us? No questions? Any closing ideas or remarks from you kick off, Brian?
We can ask everybody who's present here today and tomorrow if they know of any alumni, let us know and we'll figure it out.
And Rory,
and I have the distinct privilege of being able to work across all of Scotland's universities. We're small but mighty. We punch above our weight per head of population. We're the most highly educated country in the world. We continue to innovate, but to my point around being small and mighty, there's 19 higher education institutions. 3 of them are in the arts, 16 what we would deem to be a sort of standard university. There's no reason why we can't work together, because we're greater than the sum of our parts. And I think as we start to see these alumni chapters grow in North America, and there's these new ideas and fresh ideas, we just need to make sure that there's cross-pollination there. If you're dealing, if you know somebody who's maybe from a smaller university or a newer university in the US, a UHI, something like that, lift them up, have them involved in your events, and then your sort of stalwarts in St Andrews, Glasgow, Edinburgh, whatever, with the larger cohorts, they can incorporate some of these people into their groups as well. And I must say that the alumni managers and the alumni ambassadors that do exist, whether in a formal role or informal role in the US, are really, really good at doing that.
But we found in New York, this was 10 years ago we started this, that the alumni did want to talk to each other from the different universities. They wanted to come together. Scotland didn't really think that was going to be the case, but we got going, and it was very much because of Edinburgh University and their New York office endorsing that, and we grew that, and we sort of, that's why I think New York's quite good, because we've actually been pushing that and using Tartan Day to give them that opportunity to meet up and do things as university to university, not saying to them, you have to come to our events, but why don't you have an event together, as you have, has been done with different other receptions. I think that's
I will
important.
say, just for a point of note, Universities Scotland, which are the governing body in Scotland, they have 2 groups that focus on North America: the North American Regional Group and the Scottish University International Group. And thematically, their board meetings are looking at things like this. I think that a little bit of additional pressure from some of our sort of high-flying alumni in the US to move things along a little bit quicker could be quite refreshing, and it might be nice to see how they can help steer that conversation.
Excellent. Rory, thank you so much for all you always do.